Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of March of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And today we got a very important video and very important statement made by the Russians. Let's discuss this in details. Today the Russians published this video, and in this video we can see the consequences of another Ukraine attack on the energy facilities that's of the Russian Federation, and the Russians made very clear and very important statement. Over the past 24 hours, the Kiev regime continued launching attacks on the Russian energy infrastructure with the use of drones and as well as HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems. On 28 March at around 10 a.m. and 20 minutes, the Kiev regime inflicted a strike using, according to information, HIMARS multiple launch rocket system projectiles against the Sudzha gas metering station, which caused a heavy fire and actually destroyed the power facility. Then the Russians made few more statements regarding Ukraine attacks, and summarizing everything, according to the Russians, the Ukrainians are not following the ceasefire on the energy objects and the energy facilities of the Russian Federation, and the Russians reported that if the situation continues, most likely the Russians will quit this process and they will most likely begin bombing and attacking the Ukrainian energy facilities. Of course, this statement was taken by the Ukrainians, by the Ukrainian media, and was spread among people, among civilians and different organizations. The Ukrainians reported that by this statement the Russians are trying to excuse their exit from this negotiation process. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but one thing we can say for sure, that obviously something is going wrong, and obviously somebody is going to sabotage these talks and this agreement. Now let's discuss a few more statements and a few more reports from the Sudzha direction. Today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation also stated that over the past week the units of the Group of Forces North managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Gogolevka. So this is the settlements we are talking about. So now let's take a look at how the map was changing. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 26th of March of 2025. As you can see, this territory used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area. By the end of the 27th of March of 2025, based on this video, most of the mappers adjusted their maps in this area. In this video, we can see also the consequences of clashes for the border crossing checkpoint of Sudzha. Here we can see 3 Russian soldiers that were waving their flags on the Russian side of this checkpoint. And based on this video, once again, most of the mappers adjusted their maps. We did the same, and then we came to conclusion and we projected that most likely the Ukrainians would be forced in the very near future to fall back from the settlement by the name of Gogolevka, because from this configuration of the front line it is very difficult to imagine how the Ukrainians can hold their positions. And today, on the 28th of March, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation basically confirmed our projection that Ukrainians were forced to fall back from Gogolevka, and most likely now the Ukrainians are trying to hold their positions in the vicinity and around the settlement of Oleshnya. And furthermore, the Russians are advancing in the direction of this village as well. The Russians are attacking this territory from the settlement and from the direction of the village of Milovoy and Kurilovka, and the Russians are getting closer and closer. As for these territories, as you can see, we have colored these territories as a contested area based on the reports we received mainly from pro-Russian resources and neutral resources. We don't have geolocations or proofs that the Russians control this territory, and now we see that the Russians also managed to reach this same settlement from the north in this direction. So summarizing everything, we believe that during the next 2-3 days we're gonna start receiving first reports and first updates from the territory of Oleshnya about very heavy clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And of course, then we can ask ourselves very important question, whether the Russians are planning to move further in the direction of Yunakivka or not. As for the Ukrainians, they probably don't know the exact answer to this question, but it doesn't matter, because despite the fact that Ukrainians don't know for sure whether the Russians are going to do this or not, they continue building their protection nests. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians continue building these constructions with nests with the purpose to reduce damage that the Russians can deal Ukrainian vehicles and Ukrainian logistics with the use of fiber optic drones. But we see that there are still a lot of job to do. The Ukrainians basically just started this process, and there are still a lot of facilities, a lot of objects, a lot of defense, let's say, constructions they need to create to secure the road NO7 between the city of Sumy and the city of Yunakivka. One thing we can say for sure: if the Ukrainians during the next 2, 3, 4 weeks are able to build this defense nests from the settlement of, let's say, Ivolozhansk along the NO7 road towards the settlement of Yunakivka, then most likely they will be able to hold their positions on the territory of Yunakivka for another month or even 2 before the Russians are able to break through the Ukrainian defense belt, mainly with the use of armed vehicles, tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. But if the Ukrainians are not able to establish and to create these defense nets, most likely the Russians would be able to reach the outskirts of Loknya and Yunakivka probably during the next several days, basically after the fall of Oleshnya. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Sudzha direction. We have a lot of very important updates. Today the Russians published very interesting video from the northeastern part of the settlement of Guevo. Here we can see how a Russian soldier was making a movie from the northeastern part. Basically, he was recording the positions of the armored force of Ukraine in the rest of the village of Guevo. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in this part of the settlement. We have adjusted the northeastern part, as you can see, and we have adjusted the forest behind the village of Guevo, which means that the clashes for the settlement basically just begun and there are still a lot of job to do. But due to the fact that the Russians have already entered the settlement of Guevo, most likely in 2-3 weeks the village would be taken by the Russians completely, and then most likely the Russians gonna need another 2 or 3 weeks to get the village of Garnal, and basically the battle for the last settlement of the Kursk region will begin. The last settlement that will remain under Ukraine control for another 3-4 weeks probably in spring. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Belgorod direction. As you can see, we have adjusted the map in the Ukrainian favor. Today we got video that confirms Russian-Ukrainian presence on the territory of the settlement. This is, for example, the situation in this area on this front line by the end of the 27th of March of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 28th of March of 2025. We have adjusted the map based on this video that was published by the Russians. In this video we can see how the Ukrainian troopers were moving along the streets of the village of Popovka, and for example in this moment we see how the Ukrainians entered some building on the territory of the settlement. In the final part of this video we can see how the Russian drone Inahodets was bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of this village. Based on this report, based on this geolocation and this proof, we have adjusted the map and we have colored part of the village of Popovka in Ukraine favor and the territory to the south. Once again, this is the situation by the end of the 27th of March, and this is the situation by the end of the 28th of March. Today we got very important, let's say, statements from, let's say, pro-Russian sources. They reported that several days ago Zelensky had a meeting with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Emmanuel Macron, with the President of France. And during this meeting, the UK and French leaders told Zelensky that during the next several weeks or months, probably before the end of May, Zelensky and his Ukraine army should take as many as possible territories along the border. The order is not just to take some territories with some strategic value or some tactical value. No, the problem and the task is to take as many as possible territories that sometimes doesn't have any value at all. And the main reason of this is to take as many as possible with the purpose then to have possibilities to change these territories, for example, for Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So this is the main target and main purpose of Ukraine for the next several weeks, while the Russians are trying to restore control over the border and to attack on other directions. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupyansk direction. The battle for the river Voskol is gaining momentum. The Russians are advancing and they're taking more and more territories under complete control. Today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Krasnopershe. So we don't have proofs, so we're talking about videos. The only proof we have is the report of the Minister of Defense. Based on this update, we have adjusted the map and we have colored these territories. Telling the truth, we have colored these territories softly because we don't know for sure how exactly the Russians entered this territory, because the Russians could enter this territory using along the main road between the village of Gogolevka and Krasnopershe itself, but on the other side the Russians could enter the same village from the village of Petrivka. So as for now, we are waiting for additional proofs. We will keep this map like this, but maybe in the future we will adjust the map back, some parts in Ukrainian favor, some parts would be colored in the Russian favor when we get better proofs and better clarifications of the situation on the ground. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupyansk direction, where the situation for the Ukrainians is getting very difficult. So when talking about this map, we see that there is a pocket. There is a pocket that the Russians most likely are trying to cut. We are talking about the pocket between the village of Kopany, Stepy, then the village of Nadievka that Ukrainians managed to restore control over several days ago, then the village of Novoyegorovka, then the village of Grekovka, and then the villages of by the name of Nova, Katerinovka, Lipova, and Ritkadub. So we see that there is a real pocket. It's not very huge, big pockets, but this is pocket. This is pocket, and we have most likely exactly what the Russians are trying to do right now. But the thing is that Ukrainians somehow managed to discover the real Russian plans regarding this territory, and several days ago, probably a week or two ago more precisely, the Ukrainians carried out very successful counterattack with the use of soldiers from the 3rd Storm Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, and as a result of that counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to restore complete control over the settlement by the name of Nadievka. The Ukrainians managed to enter the villages of Kopanki and Stepy, and the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the village by the name of Zeleny Gai. That was very powerful and very successful counterattack carried out by the Ukrainians. And by that counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to ruin the Russian plans for the northern flank of their major offensive operation in the southern Kupyansk direction. At the same time, the Ukrainians carried out several counterattacks in the southern part, but those attacks were repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians suffered losses and were forced to fall back. Furthermore, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to take significant number of strongholds under complete control. So the Russians are advancing in this area, and we see that currently the Ukrainians can't show anything to slow down the Russians, or at least to stabilize the situation. The dynamic in this area is very big. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 26th of March, this is the situation by the end of the 27th of March, and this is the situation by the end of the 28th of March, and we believe the situation in this direction will continue improving in Russian favor. So summarizing everything, we see that the first target for the Russians is to take under complete control this salient, and now we see from this let's say direction, from this pocket, how exactly the Russians are moving. We see that the Russians most likely will continue their offensive operation while they are able to answer this let's say agglomeration of small villages. We are talking about the village of Cherneshno, Stepovo, Izumske, Druzhelubovka, and so on. So this village is the target of the Russians when they are trying to attack from the south. And basically now we understand that Ukraine attack in the direction of Nadia most likely ruined the similar, let's say, offensive operation in the direction of Cherneshena, but this time from the north. So summarizing everything, we see that now the Russians are focused to cut this salient. And if the Russians are able to cut this salient and to establish on the front line something like this, then this can lead to significant problems for the armored forces of Ukraine. Basically, this is going to be something like the beginning of a very, very huge disaster for the armored forces of Ukraine. Just imagine yourself, the Russians established control over this pocket, and then the Russians would be able to shorten the distance between possible their positions and the river of Oskol itself for just itself 30 kilometers, which is already the distance for artillery fire. And from these, let's say, positions, the Russians will be able to attack and advance in many directions. The Russians can continue offensive in the direction of Piski, Radkovsk, Pokrovsk. This attack may allow the Russians to cut this, let's say, direction into and to cut the settlement of Barova from the mainland, from the southern foothold. From the same bridgehead, the Russians will be able to advance in the southern directions towards the settlement of Lyman and to handle with this direction separately from the Kupyansk direction or Barova direction. So we see that once again, Russian offensive in this area is gaining momentum, and it's very interesting to see what the Ukrainians are planning to do with this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Lyman direction. Once again, today several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to secure the forest to the north of Tarskoye completely. Furthermore, the Ukrainians continue bringing more and more forces in Dorechno Tarskoye because they understand that in the very near future, the Russians may try to test the Ukrainian positions and Ukrainian defense in this area. The Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over this territory. In this video, we can see how Ukrainian vehicle, probably evacuation vehicle, was ambushed by the Russian drone that was, let's say, established there for the purpose to seek for another vehicle than to destroy it. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kostyantynivka direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation as well. And today we received lots of videos that confirm that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions both in the northern part of the city of Terezk, in the northwestern part, and in the Zabalka micro district. There are still lots of job to do for the Russians, for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but every day the Russians are getting closer and closer to this, let's say, final day when the Russians will be able to establish complete control over the city of Terezk in their geographical borders. And then the Russians will be able to move further in the direction of Kliban-Bytska water reservoir and in the direction of Kostyantynivka itself. And when summarizing and taking into account everything we received, we believe that obviously during the spring military campaign this is going to happen. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions along N20 road, and today we got several reports from furthermore, and including the reports from pro-Ukrainian sources, that the settlement of Leman was completely secured by the Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. According to information we have, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Kotlina. As for now, the entire village, as you can see, is colored as a contested area, or the area that was covered with the fog of war. The thing is that now it's unclear who exactly is controlling the settlement. Most likely neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians have 100% control over the settlement. Most likely this area indeed is the area that covered with the fog of war. There are very heavy clashes, and currently nobody have the full initiative in their hands. The Ukrainians today published video that confirmed Russian-Ukraine control over the northern and the northwestern part. From the other side, another Ukrainian source published another video that confirms Russian control over the southern part. So we believe that the main clashes in the very near future are going to take place for the railways. The Russians will try to hold the Ukrainians and not to allow them to restore control over the railways, and this is going to be a line of combat contact for a very long period of time. This is very important and the vital question for the Russians, to hold their lines along the railways, because this is a perfect position for defense. Now let's move further. The Russians, after several reports that Ukrainians managed to enter Salona, counterattacked and restore control over the western part of the village, based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians began another offensive operation with the purpose to encircle the Ukrainians on the territory of the settlements of Bahatyr and Alexeyevka. Currently, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the northeastern direction. Let's compare the maps. This is the situation on the map by the end of the 27th of March. This is by the end of the 28th. The Russians improved their positions and entered Bogdanovka from the southeast. Obviously, very important advance. And furthermore, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the west from the TO515 road. So they captured significant number of of tree lines and fields, and the Russians continue advancing further in the western direction. All in all, the Russians are trying to attack Alexeyevka and Zelený Kut from the north and from the northeast, and to establish complete control over the main supply lines. The same operation the Russians are currently trying to carry out in the southern direction. Several sources the second day in a row continue reporting that the Russians entered the village of Rozhly from the east. This information today once again was confirmed by very reliable pro-Russian resource. The same resource reported that the Russians also managed to improve their positions from Razdolny in the northern direction, and the Russians managed to shorten the distance between an A15 road and their possible edge position for just less than 5 kilometers, which is also something like a certain type of control, not 100% control, but FPV drone control, or at least mortar or artillery control complete. So which means that the news around Ukraine positions in the Bahatyr direction is tightening, and every single day the situation for the Ukrainians is going to be worse than the situation the previous day. Now let's move further and let's discuss about Russian offensive along the river of Mokry Yaly. Today another pro-Russian resource confirmed additional progress on the ground. I'll remind you that yesterday several pro-Russian resources reported that the armored forces of the Russian Federation broke through the Ukraine defense belt and entered the village of Veselye from the east. Today this information was confirmed by pro-Russian mappers, as for now without any proofs or any geolocations. As for the Zaporizhzhia direction, today the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the village of Mali Shcherbaki was completely secured by the Russians. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back. Furthermore, several pro-Russian sources published another video where we can see how the armored forces of the Russian Federation entered also the village of Shcherbaki. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. So despite the fact that it's going to be very difficult for the Russians to improve their positions further, they continue offensive, and every single day they improve their positions along the line of combat contact for another few square kilometers. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.